David was sitting at his desk, watching the scene unfolding in front of him. The office, with its glass walls and modern design, seemed to pulse with energy. He saw Sarah, his wife, surrounded by coworkers who were applauding her enthusiastically. Her beaming smile lit up the room, and the way she received the promotion seemed almost magical. "You deserve this, love," said one of the classmates, clapping his hands. David forced a smile, but inside him, a storm was brewing. As Sarah made her way to the makeshift stage to accept her award, David couldn't help but feel a tightness in his chest. He had worked hard, often devoting himself to projects that left him exhausted at the end of the day, but the promotion he sought kept slipping out of his hands. "It's just a matter of time," he remembered saying to himself. But now, seeing Sarah being praised by Mark, the charismatic boss who was also his superior, doubt began to creep into his mind. After the ceremony, as everyone dispersed, David approached Sarah. She was radiant, and her eyes sparkled with the excitement of achievement. "Congratulations, love. I'm so proud of you," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you, honey. I couldn't have done this without you." "You've always been there for me," Sarah replied, giving him a soft kiss on the lips. However, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind that promotion, something that wasn't just merit. In the days that followed, David began to hear whispers throughout the company's corridors. Casual conversations between colleagues revealed rumors about Mark's favoritism towards Sarah. "She's Mark's favorite now. I bet he has his eye on her," one of the employees commented, laughing. David didn't mind the joke, but what was supposed to be a laugh became a weight in his stomach. He didn't want to believe that Sarah's meteoric rise could be linked to something darker. One night, while Sarah was in the bathroom, David took out his cell phone, distracted and without thinking. He hesitated for a moment, reminding himself that trust was the foundation of their relationship, but curiosity was stronger. Upon unlocking the screen, he found text messages that made his heart race. They were conversations between Sarah and Mark, full of compliments and an intimacy he had never seen. "You are amazing. I don't know how the company would work without you," one message read. David's blood ran cold. He put the cell phone back, his mind spinning. "It can't be," he whispered to himself. The pieces of the puzzle began to come together, but the picture that emerged was terrifying. He got up from the bed, feeling like the floor had moved away from beneath his feet. The idea that his wife might be having an affair with his boss was unbearable. Distrust rose like an overwhelming wave. David knew he needed to find out the truth. But how? He sat in the living room, the light from the computer screen reflecting off his face as he stared at the blank screen. What should he do? An impulse for revenge began to form in his mind, but he needed proof, something that was undeniable. "If that's true, I can't sit still," he muttered, determined. With a heavy heart and a racing mind, David decided he could no longer ignore the signs. He needed to investigate, even if it meant crossing a path that could be painful. "I'll find out what's going on," he promised himself, as the echo of laughter and celebrations of Sarah's promotion still rang in his ears, like a constant reminder that trust, once broken, can be difficult to restore. The night stretched on, and the shadow of distrust began to settle in, promising a storm ahead. David walked through the busy streets of the city center, his mind buzzing with thoughts and questions. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah getting her promotion. Her smile, radiant in the spotlight, seemed more like a sign of triumph than a moment of celebration. Meanwhile, he felt stagnant in his position, as if he were stuck in an endless routine. The conversations he had heard between colleagues about Sarah's closeness to Mark echoed in his mind, but he couldn't believe that his wife could allow herself to be drawn into such a dirty power play. Upon arriving home, David decided he needed to better understand what was happening. He didn't want to be the jealous husband, but distrust grew like a shadow in his heart. He began to observe Sarah from afar, paying attention to the small details, the subtle changes in behavior. She seemed more excited the last few weeks, and it wasn't just about the promotion. There was something else, a new energy that David couldn't identify. He noticed that whenever Mark was around, Sarah had an unusual sparkle in her eyes. At a company event, David saw his wife and Mark talking animatedly in a corner. The chemistry between the two was palpable, and it made him uneasy. He tried to distract himself with coworkers, but his eyes kept returning to that moment. "Look how she laughs," murmured a friend at her side. "It seems like they're in another world." David forced a smile, but inside, his mind was in a whirl. He felt like an intruder, unable to understand what was happening between them. After the event, upon returning home, the tension was unbearable. David decided he needed concrete proof. He began investigating, examining Sarah's cell phone whenever he got the opportunity. One night, while she was taking a shower, he looked through her messages. His heart sank when he found a receipt for dinner at an expensive restaurant, dated a Thursday, a date when he was busy with a work meeting and didn't see her. "What was that, Sarah?" he whispered to himself, anger and pain mixing in his chest. "David, are you well?" Sarah asked as she entered the room, a towel wrapped around her body. He quickly put away his cell phone, trying to hide his uneasiness. "Just thinking about some work things," he replied, his voice tense. She smiled, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. David didn't want to worry Sarah, but the truth was that distrust was eating away at his sanity. The days passed, and each encounter between Sarah and Mark became harder to ignore. He saw her going out to lunch with him, laughing at something Mark had said. Anger was growing inside him, but he tried to remain calm, rational. He talked to a friend about his feelings, seeking support. "Man, you're letting yourself get carried away by paranoia. Maybe it's just friendship," the friend suggested, but David couldn't believe it. Things weren't that simple. One rainy night, as the storm raged outside, David decided he could no longer live in uncertainty. He needed to confront the truth, but how could he do that without letting the pain overwhelm him? The thought of losing Sarah terrified him, but the possibility of betraying her infuriated him. He took a deep breath, determined to prepare himself for what was to come, aware that the investigation would not just be a search for answers, but a journey that could change everything between them. "I need to know the truth," he muttered to himself as he looked out the window, the rain falling like tears. The light of the city mixed with the darkness, reflecting the turmoil within his heart. Every day, the line between love and betrayal became thinner, and David knew that soon he would have to choose between the love he still felt for Sarah and the betrayal that was about to tear his life apart. David sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen, but his mind was far from there. He couldn't stop thinking about the messages he had found on Sarah's cell phone. The words she exchanged with Mark were like a poison that slowly spread into his heart, eating away at him from the inside. To ease the pressure, he took a deep breath and decided he needed help. It was then that he remembered Lucas, a longtime friend who worked as a private detective. That same night, David called Lucas. The tone of his voice conveyed the urgency of the situation. "Lucas, I need you to help me. It's about Sarah," he said, hesitating for a moment. I think she's having an affair. With Mark." "Calm down, David. Let's do it by steps. What's wrong with you?" Lucas asked, his voice firm and reassuring. David quickly explained the situation, from Sarah's promotions to the messages he had seen. "I need proof, Lucas. Something that shows me I'm not just being paranoid." "Leave it to me," replied Lucas. "I'm going to install a tracking app on her cell phone. This way, we will be able to see the messages they exchange." In the days that followed, David felt like a spectator in his own life. He was alert, watching Sarah's every move, trying not to let her notice the storm brewing inside him. When she finally heard from Lucas, her heart sank. The detective had gained access to the messages. "David, we have a problem," Lucas said into the phone, his voice deep. "The messages between Sarah and Mark are, well, very intimate. They are meeting in secret places. You need to see this." David felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. He didn't want to believe it, but the confirmation of his suspicions was like a punch in the gut. "And now? What do I do?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You need to confront her, but think carefully before you act. Don't let anger take control of you," advised Lucas. Night fell heavily over the city, and with it came a storm. The rain fell in cascades, and lightning lit up the sky, as if the universe itself was reflecting the turmoil in its heart. David was at home. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He wondered if he really had the courage to confront Sarah. The love he felt for her was still strong, and the thought of seeing her vulnerable made him hesitate. When Sarah arrived, she was drenched from the rain, but her smile brightened up the room, even in the bad weather. "Hey, love, you won't believe what happened at work today," she exclaimed, taking off her wet coat. David watched her, noticing how happy she looked, like nothing was wrong. And for an instant, his resolve wavered. He wanted to believe that it was all just a misinterpretation, that the messages could have a different context. "Sarah, can we talk for a minute?" he said, trying to keep his voice calm as his heart pounded in his chest. "Sure, what's up?" Sarah asked, noticing the seriousness in her voice. The storm outside seemed to be a reflection of the internal storm he was facing. David hesitated, looking into her eyes, which sparkled with an innocence he knew was no longer the truth. I found some messages on your cell phone. Messages between you and Mark." Sarah's smile instantly disappeared, and the expression on her face turned to confusion and fear. "What are you saying, David?" "I know about the meetings, about what you are doing," he stated, his voice firm, but pain lurking in every word. "No, you don't understand. This is not what it seems," Sarah pleaded, her voice cracking with panic. "Mark is just a friend. I swear." David wanted to believe, but the evidence was there, clear as the rain beating against the windows. "So explain it to me, Sarah. What is happening? Why did not you tell me?" Her vulnerability hit him like a wave, and he found himself torn between the desire to hear the truth and the impulse to follow through with his plan for revenge. The storm raged outside, but inside, a heavy silence hovered as he waited for the answer that could change everything. David sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen, but his mind was far away. He had spent the last few days organizing his ideas, putting together the pieces of a puzzle that tormented him. Sarah's cheating on Mark couldn't just be an act of infidelity. It was a calculated maneuver, and he was determined to expose that truth. With the support of his detective friend, he had managed to gather enough evidence for the revenge he so desired. That morning, he mentally reviewed the plan he had come up with. The company meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., and it was the perfect time to launch the coup. "David, are you sure about this?" asked Lucas, his detective friend, as he adjusted the hidden camera he had managed to fit into a small device. Lucas's look was a mix of concern and support. "This could end very badly. I have no choice, Lucas. They need to know the truth. And I need to do this," David replied, his voice thick with determination. He knew that exposing Sarah and Mark was a risk, but he could no longer care about the consequences. The pain of betrayal had turned into an anger that drove him. Upon entering the meeting room, David felt the weight of curious looks. He positioned himself in front of the projection screen, his heart pounding. Sarah sat on his left, beaming as always, but there was something about her smile that seemed forced. Mark, on his right, displayed that typical confidence that made him so charismatic, but which David now saw as a mask for his true nature. "Good afternoon, everyone," David began, trying to keep his voice steady. "Today, I bring some information that I consider essential for the future of our team." The words left his mouth like a weight, but he was determined to move on. With a gesture, he activated the video he had prepared. The room fell silent, and the air seemed to freeze. The images showed Sarah and Mark at a romantic dinner, exchanged laughs, subtle touches, meaningful looks. The clamor from the video echoed in the room, and David could feel the tension rising. He looked at Sarah, who was now pale, her eyes wide with shock. "This is absurd," Mark exclaimed, trying to interrupt the performance. "David, you can't do this." "Not only can I'm doing it," David replied, his voice stronger than he expected. "You two were having fun while I was working hard, believing I had a wedding." The words came out with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. He felt in control, but also devastated by what he was doing. The room was in sepulchral silence, all eyes fixed on Sarah, who couldn't hide her shame. David could see the tears forming in her eyes, but there was no room for compassion at that moment. "This is what happens when you play with other people's feelings," he continued, his voice now lower but still charged with emotion. And I'm going to expose this to everyone. David, please, Sarah begged, her voice shaking. That's not who you are. Think about our life together. Her plea reached him, but he was so immersed in anger that he couldn't think clearly. I'm actually thinking, Sarah. And the truth is, you broke everything, David said, his voice now barely above a whisper, but still filled with pain. He turned to the audience, watching the reactions, the perplexed faces, some in shock, others in compassion. And at that moment, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The truth was finally being revealed, but at what cost? The meeting turned into chaos. Voices were raised. Some people murmured among themselves. Others looked at David with disappointment. He felt like he was in a hurricane, the emotional storm around him washing everything away. The victory he had imagined didn't seem so sweet after all. As Sarah and Mark tried to defend themselves, David realized that the line between justice and revenge was thinner than he had thought. He walked away from the table, feeling like a stranger in his own body. The room was filled with murmurs, but his mind was in a whirl. The truth was exposed, but the weight of betrayal still weighed on his heart. David realized that momentary satisfaction was not enough to erase the pain he felt. And as he looked at Sarah, he knew that the life he knew would never be the same. The atmosphere in the meeting room was tense. The walls, normally adorned with pictures of the company's achievements, now seemed to witness a drama unfolding in real time. Sarah stood, her face pale and eyes wide, while David stared at her with a determination he himself didn't know he possessed. The video he had presented still echoed in the minds of his colleagues, and the growing murmur became a wave of disbelief. David, I can't believe you did that. Sarah finally managed to articulate, her shaky voice reflecting the mixture of anger and despair. That's not the way to resolve things. Settle things? David repeated, his tone heavy with irony. Don't you think it's time to face the truth, Sarah? You and Mark played with everyone's feelings here. And don't forget, you were willing to sacrifice our lives for this. Mark, who until then had tried to maintain a position of control, now found himself cornered. David, this isn't what you think. I'm her boss. The company's dynamics are complicated. You can't just, he hesitated, realizing his words no longer carried any weight. The room was full of accusing looks, and the pressure was beginning to close around him like a suffocating blanket. Complicated? Or are you just trying to save yourself? David intervened, his gaze piercing. You should have thought about the consequences of your actions. You used your power to manipulate and destroy, Mark. Now, it's time to pay for it. Mark's expression changed from disdain to despair. You cannot do that. I have friends in senior management. That will not remain like this. He tried to divert attention, but David would not be intimidated. Adrenaline was pulsing through his veins, and the feeling of finally having control over his life was powerful. Of course I can, David replied, confidence growing in his tone. What you don't realize is that your position of power is no longer a protection. You are surrounded, and everyone here knows what you did. Upon hearing the company's name being mentioned, the tension in the room increased even more. The murmur intensified, and some colleagues began to take out their cell phones, recording the moment that would become a milestone in the company's history. Sarah, desperate, tried to get closer to David. Please, you need to listen to me. I made a mistake, but I'm not the only one failing here. You can't just destroy our lives like that. And you think I'm going to feel sorry for you? David snapped, his gaze hardening. You betrayed me, Sarah. You destroyed everything we built together. Now, I'm just doing what's right. She turned to her colleagues, looking for some form of support, but was met with only disapproving looks. The weight of shame began to set in, and his expression of confidence faded. I didn't want all of this to happen. I thought I could handle it another way. And now you see the consequences of your choices, David said, without an ounce of compassion. The dismissal is just the beginning. You and Mark will answer for all of this. Mark, realizing his game was over, tried one last trick. David, you can't do this. You have no concrete evidence about what happened between us. It's just an accusation. Evidences? David raised an eyebrow. Do you really think this will save you? Your own reputation is at stake. And I am just beginning to expose their manipulative practices. David's words were like sharp knives, cutting through the illusion of control Mark thought he had. As tensions rose, David realized that the revenge he so desperately wanted was not bringing the relief he had imagined. The pain of betrayal still pulsed in his heart, and the realization that there was no winner in that battle hit him like a blow. "You'll never understand," Sarah said, her voice now low and full of pain. "I just wanted to be recognized, David. You know how difficult it is in this world." David took a deep breath, feeling the internal battle between the desire for revenge and the sadness at the loss of his former life. "Difficult? I thought we were a team, but you chose the wrong side." As the room became a sea of murmurs and curious glances, David finally understood that the real battle was not with Sarah or Mark, but with the pain of betrayal that now shaped his life. He didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, the only certainty he had was that everything had changed forever. The sun slowly set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. David watched through the window of his new office, now on the company's highest floor, an achievement that seemed distant months ago. He had become head of the department, a role that brought him respect and recognition, but also a weight of responsibility that made him question his choices. In that moment of introspection, he couldn't help but remember the betrayal that had devastated his life, the betrayal of Sarah, his ex-wife. As he pondered his path, a light knock on the door brought David back to the present. It was Clara, his new assistant, a woman who radiated positive energy and who, from day one, had helped ease the burden he carried. "David, do you have a few minutes? We need to discuss the presentation to the board," she said, with an encouraging smile. "Of course, Clara. Come in," replied David, trying to hide the melancholy that still accompanied him. As Clara explained her ideas, David felt more and more comfortable. He had found someone who not only respected his leadership, but also brought a freshness to the work environment. "Do you really believe we can impact the board's vision with these proposals?" he asked, a gleam of hope in his eyes. "Without a doubt. I believe we can show them that we are ready for new directions," Clara responded, her confidence infectious. David found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. However, the tranquility of his new life was about to be shattered. During a board meeting, David received a warning that Sarah had tried to sabotage his new position. An anonymous email, warning about manipulation of information that could result in his dismissal, reached him. The anger and betrayal he thought he had overcome resurfaced with a vengeance. He needed to act quickly. "Clara, can you make a copy of all the emails involving my promotion? I need to make sure everything is documented," he asked, his voice firm. "Of course, David." "What's going on?" she questioned, noticing the change in his tone. "It's something I had to face. Sarah, she's not happy with what happened, and it feels like she's trying to bring me down again," he replied, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "I can't let this go." David decided to confront the situation head-on. At an extraordinary board meeting, he stood up, determination pulsing through his veins. "Gentlemen, I would like to discuss some issues that have arisen regarding my promotion. There is an attempted sabotage that needs to be addressed," he began, looking each board member in the eye. A murmur ran through the room, and the tension was palpable. He continued, "I have received information that Sarah is trying to manipulate data and create a scenario that could lead to my dismissal. This is not just a matter of honor, but of integrity." As David spoke, his heart raced, but he remained steady. The board, initially skeptical, began to pay attention. "If I may, I would like to present emails and documents that prove this manipulation," he continued, opening his laptop. The presentation was impressive. Clara, who was at his side, watched in admiration. David exposed not only the sabotage attempts, but also the truth about Sarah and Mark's betrayal, revealing that he was not a man who allowed himself to be carried away by the shadows of the past. After the meeting ended, the board met to discuss the consequences of Sarah's actions. David felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. He had faced his demons and, in doing so, reaffirmed himself as a strong and ethical leader. Later, as he left the building, Clara accompanied him. "You were amazing in there, David. I'm proud of you," she said, her admiration evident. He smiled, feeling like he was finally ready to move on. Thank you, Clara. I really appreciate your support. That night, as David looked out over the illuminated city, he realized that true victory was not in getting revenge on Sarah or Mark, but in maintaining his integrity. He had learned that hate and betrayal didn't have to define his life. Instead, he was building a promising future, surrounded by people who truly cared about him. The love and peace he now felt was the true reward for his resilience.